Welcome to the Debunkers Podcast.
Ever stare at your pharmacy bill and wonder if your copay is actually a down payment on a pharmaceutical CEO's yacht?
Yeah, you're probably not alone in thinking that.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. We wade through the murky waters of what's making headlines. Today, we're zeroing in on President Trump's latest attempt to tackle those eye-watering prescription drug prices. Another executive order.
And let's face it, that wallet-punching reality, it's backed by the numbers. There was that RAND report 2024, I think.
Yeah, the latest one.
It laid it out pretty clearly. We're shelling out almost 3 times as much for the exact same medications compared to people in other developed countries.
3 times?
It's huge.
Oh.
Take insulin, right? A life or death drug for so many people, it's around, what, $100 here?
Roughly, yeah.
Meanwhile, across the pond in France, it's like $10.
Yeah.
$10.
Oof. Hard to swallow, pun intended.
Definitely.
Exactly. So, for this deep dive, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to kind of figure out if this executive order is the magic bullet we've been hoping for.
Or maybe just more political theater.
Could be. We're here to cut through the noise, get to what really matters, without, making your brain feel like it's run a marathon.
Right.
Now, at the heart of this whole thing is this concept, most favored nation pricing. MFN.
MFN, yeah.
Sounds straightforward, right? Like finally getting that top-tier discount you deserve.
Like a VIP club for drug prices.
Exactly. But instead of a warehouse club, it's for keeping you alive. Okay, let's unpack this.
So first off, why are we in this mess? Why are U.S. prices so high to begin with?
Good question.
Well, it really boils down to how different our healthcare system is compared to places with, say, universal coverage. Dr. Celine Gounder has talked about this.
Right.
In those countries, the government is basically the main buyer, the ultimate negotiator. They have huge leverage to drive down drug costs for everyone.
Makes sense. Here in the U.S., though, until pretty recently with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Which was 2022?
Yeah, signed by President Biden. Before that, Medicare, our biggest public health insurer, basically had its hands tied, couldn't negotiate prices.
And even now, the negotiation power it does have is limited to just a small fraction of drugs.
It's like trying to haggle over the price of a single apple with someone who buys entire orchards. You just don't have the clout.
Precisely. Then you layer in the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs.
Ah, yes, the infamous PBMs. The middlemen.
Prescription drug middlemen, yeah. Or maybe toll collectors. Recent FTC reports have flagged some really head-scratching situations.
I saw those. Costs jacked up by hundreds, even thousands of %.
Exactly. It makes you wonder where the supposed savings are actually going, doesn't it?
It really does. But, okay, the Trump administration frames this differently.
They do. Their argument is basically that other countries are getting a free ride on American innovation.
Freeloading, essentially.
That's the term they use. The White House put out a statement saying the U.S., with less than 5% of the world's population, funds something like 3/4 of global pharmaceutical profits.
Wow, 3/4.
Yeah. So the argument goes, those low prices overseas are only possible because we are paying through the nose here, subsidizing it all.
Okay, so that's the why behind this executive order.
That's the core justification, yes. Now, what's actually in the plan? What does it propose?
Right, the details.
Well, the main instruction is for the Secretary of Health and Human Services, that's currently Robert S. Kennedy Jr., to basically tell drug manufacturers what these MFN price targets are.
And they have to do this within 30 days.
Within 30 days, yeah. Which,
That's incredibly fast for government work.
It is. And there's a bit of a threat tucked in there, too.
Ooh.
It mentions additional aggressive action if the drug companies don't play ball, including maybe imposing MFN pricing through actual rulemaking.
So it starts as a suggestion, but could become mandatory.
Potentially. The order also floats the idea of expanding drug importation beyond just Canada, building on a previous EO, if this MFN pricing doesn't happen.
Okay, bringing in cheaper drugs from more places.
Right. Plus, it directs the Attorney General and the FTC to go after any anti-competitive behavior in the pharma industry.
And didn't it also mention something about direct-to-consumer purchasing?
It did. It aims to make it easier for patients, for you, to buy directly from manufacturers at these potential lower MFN prices.
It paints quite a rosy picture of potentially much more affordable drugs.
It definitely does.
But the million-dollar question, or maybe the billion-dollar question here, will any of this actually work?
And that's where the skepticism really floods in.
Yeah, I bet.
Absolutely. CBS News pointed out pretty quickly, it's really uncertain if this order can actually make headway.
And haven't we seen something like this before?
We have. Dr. Gounder reminded us that a similar MFN push during Trump's first term got blocked by federal courts.
Ah. So there's precedent for it failing.
Exactly. History suggests this isn't exactly a straightforward path. It's legally tricky.
Right, because you can't just declare global prices by executive order. Dr. Gounder also said real change probably needs Congress, right?
That's her view. Things like giving Medicare full negotiating power, maybe tackling campaign finance reform to lessen pharma's influence.
Which of course brings us to the pharmaceutical industry itself. They're not going to just roll over, are they?
Not a chance. The pushback started almost immediately. They argue, as they often do, that lower prices will kill innovation.
The innovation argument, yes.
We've heard from John F. Crowley at BIO, Stephen Ubel at PHRMA. They're calling MFN pricing a bad deal. Ubel even compared importing foreign prices to importing from, wait for it, socialist countries.
Wow. Strong language, dialing up the rhetoric there.
Very strong. And they're putting numbers on it, too.
Yeah.
PHRMA estimates MFN pricing could cost the industry, specifically for Medicaid, $1 trillion over 10 years.
$1 trillion with a T.
That's the estimate they put out. And you're hearing warnings from executives and also some Republican lawmakers that cutting prices like this could seriously harm the pipeline for new drugs.
Okay, so big opposition, big numbers being thrown around. What are other observers saying?
Well, the Wall Street Journal had a take suggesting the order might be more bark than bite.
Why is that?
Mostly because it's missing the real nitty-gritty details on how it would actually be implemented.
Ah, the classic implementation gap.
Exactly. Gary Young, an expert over at Northeastern University, offered a more nuanced perspective.
Okay.
He thinks the order does send a signal. Tells drug companies the government's getting more serious about prices. But because it's initially voluntary, its immediate direct impact is likely limited. Though he did add that historically, the industry gets a bit more cautious when there's, noise about drug prices.
Interesting. So the threat itself might have some effect even if the policy doesn't fully materialize?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But Young also raised a really critical point about this whole most favored nation concept itself.
What's that?
Basing our prices on what, say, low-income countries pay. That might not work. Drug companies often give huge humanitarian discounts there.
Right, discounts they wouldn't or couldn't offer in a massive market like the U.S.
Exactly. It's not sustainable for the U.S. market.
Yeah.
And he also mentioned how tricky it is just comparing U.S. prices to countries with totally different systems, like government-run insurance, single purchasers.
It's not apples to apples.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the industry's standard defense. Drug development is incredibly expensive and risky.
The R&D costs.
Right. Young mentioned figures like $1 to $1.5 billion on average for each drug that actually makes it to market. And that doesn't count all the failures along the way.
That's a fair point. The costs are high. But do the numbers fully justify the price differences we see?
Well, factcheck.org dug into that. They found that, yes, on average, U.S. drug prices are about 2.78 times higher than other comparable OECD countries.
Okay, so nearly 3 times, confirming the RAND data, roughly.
Roughly, yes. But crucially, the gap varies a lot depending on the drug. And interestingly, generic drugs are often cheaper here in the U.S.
Oh, generics are cheaper. That's counterintuitive.
It is. So FactCheck concluded that President Trump's claims about the price differences might be, let's say, a bit exaggerated sometimes.
Gotcha. Not quite the simple 10x difference across the board he sometimes implies.
No. And another key thing to remember, those list prices that get thrown around, they aren't always what people or their insurers actually pay.
Because of rebates and coupons and deals.
Exactly. KFF did an analysis on Ozempic that showed this really clearly. The list price is one thing, the net price after discounts is often quite different.
Okay, so the reality is complex. Even when Medicare did start negotiating under the IRA.
Right, for that first small batch of drugs.
Those negotiated prices were still higher than the average prices in other comparable countries.
That's what a Peterson KFF analysis found, yes. Even our negotiated prices were still premium prices on the global stage.
Wow, so even our wins are relative. Juliet Kubansky from KFF also pointed out some big holes in the executive order itself, didn't she?
She did. Major lack of specifics. Like, which countries are we using for these MFN price targets? Which drugs are even included? How does this whole thing mesh with our current insurance system?
A lot of pretty fundamental unanswered questions.
Huge questions, which, unsurprisingly, leads to talk of.
Lawsuits.
You guessed it. Legal challenges from the pharmaceutical industry are widely expected. Both Kubanski and analysts, like one from JP Morgan, have flagged that.
Makes sense. They have deep pockets and a history of fighting regulations.
Definitely. And experts have also warned about other potential consequences. Companies might try to hide their foreign prices, make them harder to track.
Or just pull out of supplying certain smaller countries altogether to avoid setting a low benchmark.
That's a concern, yeah. It could have unintended negative consequences elsewhere.
Okay, what about other groups, like pharmacy groups?
Well, the Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy, AMCP, they voiced opposition too. Not necessarily defending current prices, but they're against direct government price regulation.
Yeah.
They worry about those unintended consequences. Their preferred approach is removing barriers to competition. Make it easier for generics and biosimilars to enter the market. More market-based.
A different strategy entirely. Focus on competition, not mandates.
Right. And, we can't really talk about drug pricing without acknowledging the elephant in the room. Big Pharma's influence.
Lobbying power.
Immense lobbying power. PharmaFocus America highlights their long history of shaping healthcare policy. Think back to the Medicare Modernization Act in 2003.
The one that explicitly banned Medicare from negotiating drug prices.
That's the one. And they've consistently worked to weaken drug pricing rules in things like the Affordable Care Act. It's a constant battle.
And what about patient groups? Where do they fit in?
It's complex. PharmaFocus American notes they can be allies with industry on some issues, but obviously in conflict when it comes to affordability. It's not always a straightforward relationship.
Okay, so let's try to wrap our heads around this. High U.S. drug prices, super complex problem, lots of factors, lots of players with different motives.
Definitely tangled.
This executive order, it's a bold swing, trying to tie U.S. prices directly to international ones. Sounds appealing.
On the surface, yes.
But it's facing a massive wall of industry opposition, serious legal questions, and it's, frankly, pretty fuzzy on the actual how.
Very fuzzy. Remember President Trump's claim about 50 to 90% price cuts happening almost immediately?
Yeah. Seems, let's just say, highly optimistic.
Severely optimistic, I'd say. This whole situation really forces you to ask, who actually holds the power here?
Right. Who has the real leverage in this multi-billion-dollar game? Is it the government trying these orders? Is it the giant pharma companies? Is it the PBMs working in the shadows?
Or is it ultimately us, the patients, who are supposed to benefit but often feel like we're just footing the bill?
Exactly. So will your next prescription suddenly have a lovely European price tag?
Probably not immediately.
Or is this just going to be another chapter, another footnote in the never-ending saga of U.S. drug costs? Perhaps the real question to chew on is, who truly holds the negotiating power in this whole massive industry?
Yeah, thinking about all the different players, their motivations, where the influence really lies.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
It absolutely is. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We definitely encourage you to keep digging into the complexities of drug pricing and healthcare policy. It affects every single one of us. It seems our time for today is wrapping up.
We really appreciate you joining us for this deep dive.
It's always great having your input and thoughts.
But sadly, it seems we've run out of time for today.
Thank you so much for listening and for being such an engaged part of our podcast.
We always value your participation.
Until our next deep dive together.
Goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time.